What's good in the YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here bringing another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Kamen Rider Build episode 47. This episode is called 0 Degree Flames, and the episode overall was really good. It had a really powerful ending that was pretty interesting, and we're 2 episodes away from being done with Kamen Rider Build, and then on September 2nd, we'll be starting Kamen Rider Zio, the next Kamen Rider season, so keep that in mind. So anyway, let's get started with the episode. It begins with us seeing the continuation of the previous episode where Kamen Rider Grease, or Kazumi, ends up using the Blizzard Knuckle to transform into Kamen Rider Grease Blizzard, and he ends up fighting against the 3 Hokuto Trio members that are clones, and he ends up doing pretty well in this battle. We do see a lot of cool attacks from him. What's important to note, though, is that this Blizzard Knuckle, if used to transform, will lead to death in the end, just by using it once. So that's a very important thing. If you use it as a weapon, no problem, but if you use it as a transformation device, that's where it becomes a problem. So he ends up using it, and his life force begins to diminish. In the meantime, we end up seeing that Sawa and Mizora end up arriving on the scene to watch as he's fighting this battle, and Mizora and Sawa realize that what he did, and there's even a point in the episode where it's mentioned that there's a bottle that Kazumi has that it can only be useful anymore if its energy is, if there's energy given from a person holding it through their body or whatever. It's like this weird thing that they say. And so that's kind of important. I kind of imagine that if that's true, most likely what that means is that that bottle will be used in the final battle to maybe defeat Ivalto. So that's kind of interesting. Eventually what does end up happening is that we end up seeing that Rogue heads off at one point elsewhere to kind of deal with another mimic set, and this time it's actually the Washio Bros. The Washio Bros arrive, they are transformed, and what happens is that Gentaku transforms into Kamen Rider Rogue, and he begins to fight them. Eventually, Utsumi arrives on the scene, and he ends up transforming into Mad Rogue. What does end up happening as well is that Sawa heads off because she has a mission, and she has the Pandora's box without the top panel, like we've seen before in more recent episodes. And what happens is that eventually, Mizora's watching Kazumi while Sawa's heading off to Gentaku. What happens is that Rogue ends up fighting the Washio Bros and also Mad Rogue. Eventually, Gentaku makes this kind of snarky remark about how 3 versus 1. I guess that's a fair handicap for you, basically implying that like Gentaku's not Gentaku, Utsumi's weak, which kind of is implied there. But then what happens is that Utsumi says, "Nah, it's alright," and he starts to beat up on the 2 Washio Bros. And what happens is that at the same time, Rogue also ends up fighting them, and they kind of are working together at the same time. Like one's fighting one Washio Bro and the other's fighting the other one, and then eventually the 2 Washio Bros combine into the Hell Bros. And so at that point, what happens is that eventually Sawa arrives on the scene, and she ends up explaining to them about like the conversation that she had with Utsumi, because Utsumi knew about this, and he has this loyalty to the Namba children, and the thing is that Sawa was a Namba child, if you remember. And so what ends up happening is that when she received that call from like the Namba number or whatever in the previous episode, that was Utsumi calling because he wanted her to bring with her 2 bottles that he had manipulated so that they could take advantage of these clones, and also just in general because he knew he could count on her because of he was still loyal to Namba. Even after Namba's death, he still is loyal to him, and that's kind of very important to this episode, because what does end up happening is that eventually I believe it was Rogue and Mad Rogue both use these two bottles that Sawa brings over. One's the bike bottle, one's the shark bottle, and there is a combination that Build uses in the special movie, which featured like 8 additional Build best matches. So like it's kind of cool to see them like use in another way here. And what actually ends up happening with these bottles is that they're manipulated so that it can neutralize these clones. And what happens is that they're able to take out the clones. So then following this, what does end up happening is that eventually Evolto arrives on the scene and he wants them to hand over the bottles. And then what happens is that eventually Utsumi explains the fact that he still remained loyal to Namba even after Namba had died, and he wanted revenge on him. That's the main reason why he actually wanted to side with Evolto in the first place, was for the purposes of gaining his power and inserting it into the evil driver, so that he could gain the strength that comes from the evil driver and unlock data from him, so that he could use his abilities, because he knows that Evolto is super, super powerful. So that's all good, and that's important to note. What does end up happening is that eventually he ends up using these different phase forms. He uses phase 1, which is just his basic form. He uses phase 2, 3, and then 4. And when he reaches phase 4, he's able to dash super fast like Evolto was when he was first introduced, where he was going super crazy fast around, because he had the kind of powers and strength and data that Evolto had. So that's why he was able to do similar stuff. But at the same time, since he was a human, since he was considered only a human, his abilities were limited. And what actually ends up happening is that eventually Evolto ends up knocking him out, and he begins to short circuit. Because the thing is that back when, and this is very, very early, when Gintaku ended up shooting Utsumi, and then he ended up falling off of a bridge, back when like Utsumi did the whole thing where he dressed up as Night Rogue for that one episode or whatever, and then he failed to do his mission correctly, and so then like Gintaku ended up shooting him and knocking him into the ocean, but then he was recovered later on. That whole thing actually led to him being turned into a cyborg, because he technically was dead. He actually did die. It's just what happened was that they managed to bring him back by turning him into a cyborg. And what happens is that at one point Evolto almost tries to like destroy Rogue, but what happens is that Utsumi decides to decides to get in the middle and get destroyed. And what happens is that before he's destroyed, Utsumi says, "I didn't do this to protect you, I did this to protect the lost bottles." So basically, in a way, he was protecting the world versus protecting Gintaku, because if he could get to the lost bottles, then he could just destroy the entire world or the entire universe. But by protecting him, he was protecting the entire universe. And if it protected Gintaku as well, that's just an additional thing. So yeah, that's what I'm basically saying there. So then following that, Utsumi is completely destroyed, which many people will be happy to hear that, although the way that he died in this episode kind of makes me feel a little bit more like I have a little bit more respect for him, because up until now I've really not liked Utsumi at all, but this episode kind of gave me a little bit more of a better feel for him, though at the same time he's still not a nice character. He's still kind of an awful character, not in the sense that he's not like he's not badly written, he's just someone that you have to hate, if you know what I mean. So that's an important detail to consider. So what does end up happening as well is that eventually when Gintaku's about to be attacked, he's screaming out in pain about Utsumi being destroyed, and then he ends up teleporting away Sawa and himself to a different location using his mist ability. And so that whole thing happens. In the meantime, what we do end up seeing is that Kazumi continues to fight against the Hokuto trio. He manages to wipe out two of them fairly easily with the Blizzard form, but then the third one he has to go in for his big finisher. And as he's doing this, his life force is continuing to diminish even further, and when he finally destroys the last one, his life force really starts to diminish, and there's this whole conversation that occurs between him and Mizora, because for once, he's being cheered on to stay alive, to stay strong, and by the one person that he's wanted respect and love and attention from for so long. And what's happening? He's being he's fading from existence, and she's just crying and tearing up. And the thing is that she's calling him Grease, and he's like, I guess you still will just call me Grease. And she says, well, of course I'm going to just call you Grease, because if I call you by your real name, you'll just fade right away. And that's kind of like her way of keeping him alive for a little bit longer, because of the fact that she always calls him Grease. She never really calls him Kazumi all that often, so it's kind of an important thing. And there's just this constant goodbye, which goes on for a very, very long time. I mean, really, the whole idea of his life force diminishing at such a slow rate, and he's having all this conversation, it seems a bit longer than it needs to be. Honestly, I feel like they could have cut back on it, though I get it from the perspective of telling the story more, that was a reason for it being so long, but just in general, it felt like a little bit of overkill with its length, if you know what I mean. There is also a point I forgot to mention. This is something completely separate, again, where another portion of the world is destroyed. I wanted to mention that does happen in this episode. At least one or two parts are destroyed again, in Japan, I believe. So anyway, what does end up happening is that eventually Grease does end up fade from existence. He is dead. He is finito, dead, destroyed, no more. And honestly, it makes me sad, because he is one of my favorite characters from this season. He's been a really great character, so it was kind of a sad thing, but at least he lasted as long as he did. I mean, 47 episode, being into the 47th episode is still pretty good. I mean, he hasn't been there since the start, but he's still been there for a while. So what does end up happening is that eventually he does end up, before he goes, he also gives Mizora a bottle that he wants Sento to have so he can use it, because that bottle might be used to actually destroy Yveltal in the end. And what happens is that Mizora, after she cries and everything, she gets up and she heads towards where Sento and the others are, where they're all regrouping. And what happens is that following this, Sento and the others hear Mizora, and there's complete silence during this part, and it's just so powerful, because it's just this complete silence that you can tell that she basically says, Kazumi has died, and then you see that, you see Gentaku, you see Ryoga, you see Sento, you see Mizora, you see Sawa, all crying and upset and angry, and then this moment that just really, really, really got me off, and I could just tell how Sento was feeling, because, I mean, why wouldn't you feel this way, is suddenly Yveltal shows up in the scene, and he's just like, sup, and what happens is that Sento's just like, Yveltal, and he screams it in anger, and you could just tell that he is furious. He is so angry that his comrade was destroyed due to Yveltal doing all of this terrible stuff to everyone. And you could just feel the pain that he's feeling inside me. You know what I mean? It's just so intense. So yeah, that's basically what happens. Following this, we end up seeing the preview. The preview looks pretty cool. What we do end up seeing is that Yveltal will be using his true evolved monster form. So we've seen his monster form already, but this is going to be an even more evolved form, which is even more powerful. That will be introduced in the next episode. So that'd be very cool to look forward to seeing. That was something that was actually shown off a couple of weeks ago, showcasing that truer monster form. So that will be shown off in episode 48. And as far as whether or not Yveltal will be destroyed in the next episode, maybe. If not, it will be episode 49. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what does end up happening. I'm kind of hoping for next episode to be the end of Yveltal, but I don't know for sure. They may actually decide 49 will be when they destroy him completely. Again, what this also likely means is that Zio won't be featured in the show, most likely, but he was featured in the Kamen Rider Be the One movie that just came out in Japan, so keep that in mind, that Zio was featured there. The reason why I even mention that is because typically in a lot of more recent Kamen Rider seasons, they've had it where the next season's rider does end up showing up in the show and helping out the current rider. So the thing is that it may not happen for the show, but at least it happened in the movie, and they've done it in the past where they've had it in the movie and they've had it in the show, so I guess if they do one, it's better than nothing, you know what I mean? So that's basically what I have to say there. Overall, the next episode looks like it could be pretty interesting. It does look like there's a potential thing where Gintaku may actually be destroyed next episode. That's what people are kind of thinking right now, that Gintaku might be the next one to go. What we do also know already is that supposedly Ryoga might be the one that will lead to the to Yveltal being destroyed because of his connection to Yveltal, which would make sense just because of his DNA connection and all that. So we'll have to wait and see. Overall, I'm looking forward to seeing where things will go from here. I don't expect any new forms. I don't expect anything else really other than just, things to finish up, because there's only 2 more episodes left. And I'd love to know your guys' opinions about this episode, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.